I haven't shared this with anyone yet, but I guess this is the best place to let it all out. So, I'm 35 now, and this story begins when I reconnected with my nephew Clark earlier this year after not seeing him for 5 years. He's 19 now, which honestly blows my mind because the last time I saw him, he was this awkward 14-year-old kid, all limbs and braces, you know. We didn't have much in common back then, but life happened, and I ended up moving out of state, so we kind of lost touch over the years. Anyway, my sister asked me to look after him for a few weeks this summer while she was handling some stuff overseas. It wasn't a big deal at first. I figured we'd catch up a bit. He'd hang out at the house, and I'd go about my usual routine. I hadn't given much thought to how different things would be now that he's basically an adult. I mean, I'm still the same old Uncle Martin, right? Well, Clark shows up at my place, and let me tell you, it was like I got hit by a truck when I saw him again. I opened the door, expecting that skinny kid I remembered, but standing there was this tall, athletic guy, full of confidence. I was honestly speechless for a second, trying to process it. He'd grown up. And not just grown up, but he looked good. Fit, broad-shouldered, and he had this whole aura about him that caught me off guard. I know it sounds weird, but I couldn't help but notice the change, and it threw me. He walked in like he owned the place, all casual and comfortable, and we hugged, just a normal hug. But I remember feeling this awkward tension that wasn't there before. I didn't want to make it weird, but it was impossible to ignore. Suddenly, I was hyper-aware of everything, the way he moved, his deeper voice, even the way he smiled at me. It was unsettling, like I was seeing him through a completely new lens, and it messed with my head in ways I hadn't expected. I thought it would fade away after a day or two, like maybe I was just overthinking it because we hadn't seen each other in so long, but it didn't. That awareness lingered in the back of my mind every time we interacted. I tried to keep things normal, catching up, watching TV together, shooting the breeze about random stuff. But there was this underlying tension that I couldn't shake, no matter how hard I tried. That was just the beginning, though. I had no idea how much more complicated things were going to get over the next few days. Like I said, Clark had changed a lot. And as much as I tried to keep things casual, those unexpected thoughts kept creeping in. I was his uncle, for crying out loud, and it wasn't like I hadn't been around younger guys before. But there was something about him that just hit different, and I couldn't stop noticing it. The first couple of days after he arrived, we settled into a routine. He'd sleep in late, which gave me some time to clear my head in the mornings. I'd make breakfast, go for a run, and try to keep myself busy. But every time I heard him moving around the house or caught a glimpse of him walking around shirtless, it stirred something inside me. Clark had this casual confidence now that I hadn't seen in him before. He wasn't shy about his body, like he knew how good he looked, but without being cocky about it. One afternoon, we were lounging in the living room. He was on the couch, scrolling through his phone, and I was sitting across from him, pretending to watch TV. I couldn't help but glance over every now and then. Each time I did, I noticed more, the definition in his arms, the way his shorts rode up just a little, showing off the muscles in his legs. It was completely innocent on his part, but my mind kept wandering to places it shouldn't. At one point, he stretched out, his shirt lifting just enough to reveal a bit of his lower stomach, and I swear my heart skipped a beat. I had to look away, forcing myself to focus on anything else. But the more I tried to ignore it, the worse it got. I started noticing little things. How his laugh made me smile, how he'd brush his hair out of his face, the way his eyes would lock onto mine for just a second longer than necessary when we talked. I couldn't believe what I was thinking. It was like my brain was playing tricks on me, trying to turn something innocent into something it shouldn't be. I felt guilty, really guilty. This was my nephew, for God's sake. I shouldn't have been having these thoughts, but no matter how hard I tried to push them down, they kept bubbling back up. Then came the moment that really tipped things over the edge. It was after dinner one night. Clark had mentioned wanting to hit the shower before bed, and I didn't think anything of it. I went upstairs to my room, grabbed some clothes, and decided to shower in the downstairs bathroom while he used the one upstairs. I figured it'd be quick. Get in, get out, clear my head under the cold water, and forget about the growing tension between us. But as I stepped into the shower, I felt this odd sense that something wasn't quite right. The water was hot, steam filling the small bathroom, and as I stood there, trying to relax, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I chalked it up to my nerves being on edge, the way my thoughts had been running wild since Clark arrived. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the faintest movement near the door. I glanced over, and there he was, Clark, standing just outside the bathroom, peeking in through the crack in the door. My heart jumped into my throat. I froze for a second, not knowing what to do or how to react. Part of me wanted to call him out, to say something, but another part of me, this darker, more curious part, held me back. We made eye contact for just a split second before he quickly disappeared, pulling the door shut behind him. My mind was racing. Did I really just see that? Was he really watching me? And if he was, why? I stood there under the water trying to make sense of it all. Maybe it was nothing, maybe it was just a weird, accidental moment. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. There had been a look in his eyes, something more than just curiosity. It was quick, but it was there. For the first time since he'd arrived, I felt like the dynamic between us had shifted in a way that couldn't be ignored. The tension wasn't just on my side anymore. He had felt it too. And as wrong as it might have been, I couldn't deny the excitement that came with that realization. It scared the hell out of me, but at the same time, it made my heart race in a way I hadn't felt in years. I finished my shower in a daze, replaying that brief moment in my head over and over again. By the time I got out, I wasn't sure how I was going to face him again without things feeling different. But I knew one thing for sure. Whatever had just happened, it wasn't the end of it. Something had been set in motion, and whether I liked it or not, I wasn't sure I had the willpower to stop it. I tried to act normal after that shower incident, but let me tell you, it was anything but. The tension was suffocating, and I couldn't stop thinking about the fact that Clark had seen me. Like really seen me, and not in an innocent way. I kept telling myself it was all in my head, that maybe it was just an awkward misunderstanding. But every time I replayed that moment in my mind, the way he looked at me, that split second of eye contact, I knew it was more than that. He wasn't a kid anymore, and this wasn't just some accidental glance. He knew what he was doing, and that realization had my thoughts spinning out of control. That night, I barely slept. I tossed and turned, my mind going over every interaction we'd had since he arrived. Everything took on a new meaning, like I was piecing together a puzzle that I didn't even realize existed. Had I been missing signals? Was I reading too much into things? It felt like a battle in my head. On one side, I was telling myself this was all wrong, that I needed to shut it down before it went any further. But the other side? Well, that side was curious, tempted even, and I hated that I couldn't shake those feelings. The next morning, things felt different. Clark acted totally normal, like nothing had happened. He was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone, eating cereal like it was just another day. But I couldn't get past what had happened. I wasn't sure how to bring it up, or if I even should. What would I say? "Hey, I saw you watching me in the shower. What's up with that?" It sounded ridiculous, and I didn't want to come off as a creep. So I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was a one-time thing, and that I'd just keep my distance for a bit. But that plan didn't last long. Later that night, after we both gone to bed, I was lying there, staring at the ceiling, still wide awake. My thoughts wouldn't shut off, and then I heard it, a knock at my door. My heart started racing immediately. I knew it was Clark, and I had no idea what he wanted, but something told me this was the moment everything was going to change. I got up, opened the door, and there he was, standing in the hallway, looking a little nervous, but still with that same casual confidence he'd been carrying since he got here. Before I could even say anything, He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. There was this heavy silence between us, and I could feel the tension building again. But this time it was even stronger than before. Then he said it. "I saw you," he blurted out, his voice low, almost like he didn't want to admit it, "in the shower." I froze. There it was, out in the open, and now I had to deal with it. My mind was racing again, but I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to play it off, make a joke, pretend like it was no big deal. But the look on his face, serious, intent, told me that wouldn't work. So instead, I just nodded, acknowledging what we both already knew. And then, before I could even process what was happening, he moved closer. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as the space between us disappeared. It was like all the tension from the past few days was finally boiling over, and neither of us could stop it. My mind was screaming at me to back off, to stop this before it got out of hand. But my body had other plans. He leaned in and I didn't pull away. In that moment, everything just clicked into place, like it was inevitable. The kiss started slow, hesitant even, like we were both testing the waters, unsure of how far this was going to go. But then it deepened, and all that pent-up tension exploded between us. I could feel the heat rising between us, and I knew there was no turning back now. The line had been crossed. Before I knew it, we were on the bed, and everything was moving faster than I could process. It was intense, overwhelming, and yet I couldn't stop. It was like I'd been holding back for so long, and now that the dam had broken, there was no way to put the pieces back together. Every touch, every kiss, felt electrified, like I'd been waiting for this without even realizing it. Clark was more confident than I'd expected, taking the lead in a way that surprised me. It was like he'd been thinking about this just as much as I had, maybe even more. And as wrong as it all felt, there was a part of me that couldn't help but give in to the moment. I felt like I was being swept away, unable to control what was happening, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't want to. The rest of the night was a blur of emotions, sensations, and confusion. I don't think either of us said much after that initial confession. It was like we both knew where things were headed and didn't need words to explain it. By the time it was over, we were lying there in silence, the weight of what had just happened slowly sinking in. I could feel the guilt creeping back in, but there was also this undeniable excitement that I couldn't ignore. We didn't talk about it after that, not immediately anyway. He got up, left the room, and I just lay there, staring at the ceiling again, my mind racing even faster than before. What had we just done? And more importantly, where do we go from here? I knew things would never be the same between us, but at that moment, I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. All I knew was that the door had been opened, and now there was no going back. The next morning was surreal, to say the least. I woke up earlier than usual, my mind still hazy from everything that had happened the night before. There was this strange mix of emotions churning in my gut: guilt, excitement, confusion. I wasn't sure how to process it all, and I had no idea how to act around Clark now. Part of me hoped we could just pretend it didn't happen, but another part of me knew that was impossible. The line had been crossed, and there was no erasing it. I could hear Clark moving around in the kitchen. My heart started racing just at the sound of him, and I knew I had to face him sooner or later. I took a deep breath and got out of bed, trying to prepare myself for whatever awkward conversation might follow. My thoughts were all over the place. Did he regret it? Would he act weird? Should I say something first? There were a million questions and no answers. When I finally walked into the kitchen, Clark was sitting at the table, casually eating breakfast like it was just another morning. He didn't seem tense or awkward at all, which threw me off. I was the one feeling all twisted up inside, but he was just fine, cool as ever. I blinked, caught off guard by how nonchalant he was. "Yeah," I muttered, not really sure how to respond. I'm good." That was it. No mention of last night, no awkwardness, nothing. He just shrugged and went back to his phone, and I realized then that he wasn't going to bring it up at all. I didn't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing, but it felt like he was giving me an out, a way to avoid the conversation I wasn't ready to have. So I took it. I sipped my coffee and tried back normal, even though my mind was still spinning from everything that had happened. The rest of the day passed in a blur. We didn't talk about what had happened, not once. I wasn't sure if that was Clark's way of brushing it off, or if he just didn't care. Either way, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I saw him, every time we crossed paths in the house, my mind went back to that night. It was like this invisible weight hanging over us, but he seemed completely unbothered by it. In fact, Clark seemed even more relaxed than before. He lounged around the house, shirtless, casual, like nothing had changed between us. But every time I caught a glimpse of him, that tension was still there, gnawing at the edges of my mind. I was torn between wanting to confront it head-on and wanting to bury it, pretend it didn't happen, and just move on.